But if the very word Hamas triggers fear in your mind and mental associations with Islamic fundamentalism and indiscriminate rocket attacks against civilians, then, by definition, you have already been programmed and conditioned. And those of us seeking to promote a more intelligent, compassionate, and above all, informed understanding of what is really happening in this situation cannot hope or expect to receive a fair hearing, because our target audience simply isn't capable of receiving the message. And this, as I've already said, has often been my experience of trying to talk to people about this issue. Fear has a profound impact upon our body and our mind. It triggers deep-seated survival instincts within us that inhibit our ability to consider these matters in an objective, impartial, and clear-minded manner. Under the influence of fear, we are willing to offer our support to anyone and anything that we believe can protect us from the perceived danger. It is not a reasoned position, and if we justify our position subsequently, it really just amounts to a rationalisation, an after-the-event attempt to justify to ourselves and to others in rational terms what really amounted to an instinctive reaction of fear and self-concern. Fear is, and has always been, the greatest enemy of freedom of thought and the most powerful and potent tool of manipulation for political leaders seeking to further their agenda. And it is not without reason that Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has been sparing no efforts to equate Hamas with Islamic State, including in his recent statement made in his talk to the United Nations General Assembly on Monday. Hamas is ISIS. ISIS is Hamas. And his efforts in that talk to present the Israeli bombardment of civilian infrastructure in Gaza as the front line of a battle against global terrorism, because he knows full well that all he needs to do is to create fear in people's minds by fostering these mental associations in order to achieve his objective of getting the global general public on side. In a 2009 interview in New Statesman, Hamas leader Khaled Mashal described his party's position as follows: "Our priority as a national liberation movement is to end the Israeli occupation of our homeland. It is our firm belief that Islam cannot be imposed on people. We campaign through a fully democratic process for an Islamic agenda. If that is what the people opt for, that is their choice. We do not impose on the people any aspect of religious or social conduct. As a matter of principle, we do not have problems with the Jews or Christians, but do have a problem with those who attack and oppress us." The frequently referred to Hamas Charter, published in 1988, is essentially a historical document and is never referred to or cited by Hamas leaders and does not inform their policy position. From 1990 onwards, Hamas leaders have repeatedly made clear that they bear no animosity whatsoever towards Jews, Christians, or anyone else on account of their particular faith, but merely seek to resist those particular people seeking to murder, oppress, and dispossess them. However, such statements are never reported on by the Western mainstream media. None of this means to say that Hamas are perfect and beyond criticism. There are no doubt legitimate criticisms that can be made of them. However, when people criticise them on the basis of what they have heard about them through the mainstream media, they are simply relating to an imaginary bogeyman created by the Israeli government for the furtherance of their own political aims, with the cooperation and complicity of the Western media, and not the actual organisation and its actual representatives. That said, I believe that the decision made by Hamas to relinquish their own political power for the purpose of entering into a unity government with Fatah that would be recognised by the US and the EU clearly demonstrated their commitment to the welfare of the Palestinian people over and above their own political power, and deserved the praise and congratulations of fair-minded people everywhere. The failure of the international community to defend Hamas from the opportunistic and unsubstantiated accusations by Benjamin Netanyahu that they were responsible for the kidnappings of the 3 teens in the immediate aftermath of that brave and noble decision is what allowed Netanyahu to unleash the latest round of state terrorism against the people of Gaza. What message does it send to Hamas and the other resistance groups if their efforts to pursue the path of peaceful negotiations are responded to in that way? Because it is quite clear that the crime for which Benjamin Netanyahu was punishing Hamas was the one which they committed on the 2nd of June when they entered into a unity government with Fatah, a grievous crime indeed in view of the threat that it posed to Israel's public image, as it became increasingly clear to the watching world that all of the Palestinian factions want a negotiated peace that will allow their people a measure of freedom and dignity, and that it is the Israeli government and the Israeli government alone that is standing in the way of that. But Benjamin Netanyahu and Israeli leaders before him, such as Ariel Sharon, know full well that as far as global public opinion is concerned, they don't need to win the debate in terms of facts and reasoned arguments. They simply need to win it in terms of beliefs and impressions, which he already knows is achievable for as long as he continues to enjoy the compliance of most of the Western mainstream media and the ignorance and gullibility of the general public in Europe and America. And so it is that we witness the triumph of spectacle and illusion over fact and reason, or rather, to be more precise, those of us following events closely with a sense of what is actually happening witness that triumph, because the majority of people are simply taken in by it and mistake the illusory for the real. A spectacle and illusion that is maintained by a mainstream media whose policy of selective and decontextualized reporting, one-sided empathy, and deference to Israeli propaganda lies has the net effect of thoroughly deceiving the public as to what is actually happening in the situation year after year, decade after decade. And it is not without good cause that the Israelis are so vehemently opposed to the United Nations investigation due to take place over the coming months. Because not only do such investigations threaten to expose specific instances of war crimes in which the Israeli army and air force have engaged, their findings also threaten to expose the complicity of our politicians and mainstream media in giving credibility to Israeli claims which, when the full facts and findings are laid out, are exposed as cynical propaganda. There was, however, one point that Netanyahu gave in his speech on Monday, which I did actually agree with, one single point. And that was the point at which he said that Israel is not engaging in genocide against the Palestinian people. That is true. The Israeli government are not trying to physically kill the Palestinian people en masse. What they are doing is trying to render them politically and socially powerless, trying to destroy them as a community of people in an ongoing and relentless campaign of what the great Israeli sociologist Barak Himmeling, who sadly died in 2007, has referred to as political genocide or politicide, and which is achieved through a broad combination of means, including the theft of Palestinian land and water resources, partial ethnic cleansing, localized massacres, the assassination of Palestinian leaders, the elimination of public infrastructure such as power plants, roads and so on, and of public institutions such as schools, hospitals, universities, mosques, as well as private commercial enterprises such as factories and farms, all of which we've witnessed recently on a grand scale, and also ongoing efforts to create disharmony and distrust between the different Palestinian groups, such as between Palestinian Christians and Muslims. How much credit, I ask you, does the Israeli government deserve for not engaging in a campaign of physical genocide against the Palestinian people, but merely undertaking a campaign of political genocide or politicide against them? I would argue not very much, in view of the fact that many of the victims of this campaign of political genocide, including many of the children in Gaza, have said that they would rather have been killed by the Israeli military in the latest attacks than forced to continue to live in the conditions under which they are now living. The public is being conned, fooled, duped, deceived with respect to what is really happening in this situation. And the sad truth of the matter is that the majority of people probably simply don't care enough about something that appears to have no direct bearing on their own well-being to be all that bothered about it, even if and when they start to become aware of the discrepancy between what is being reported by the media and what is really happening. For me, there is a sad and bitter irony in the fact that a broadcaster like the BBC that does such a good job of championing the rights of British consumers with such programmes as Fake Britain, which exposes fraud and counterfeit goods, are themselves, to all effective purposes, perpetuating a form of fraud by deceiving their own viewers, both in Britain and globally, with respect to what is really happening in Israel-Palestine. But perhaps that shouldn't really be so surprising, at least if I let go of the naive notion that news broadcasters are ideologically committed to boldly and fearlessly speaking truth to power, and accept the rather more realistic idea that they are probably more interested in merely satisfying the wishes and expectations of particular interest groups, which include British consumers and the tremendously powerful and influential pro-Israeli advocacy groups, but do not include the Palestinian people or the relatively small minority of discerning and concerned viewers and listeners who object to their biased and misleading reporting on this issue. Many people that I talk to reject the claim of media bias with respect to this issue on the basis that the BBC and the liberal press don't generally express an openly pro-Israeli stance and do allow for some criticisms of Israel, but they've simply missed the point. The coverage is biased to the extent to which it misrepresents reality by denying the public the full picture of what is happening, or presenting them with the spectacle of a narrowly defined debate about what is happening that has the practical effect of reinforcing assumptions about what is happening which simply aren't true. We saw this recently with the seemingly genuine debate about whether or not Israel's actions were quote-unquote disproportionate, with media commentators and politicians essentially falling into two camps: those who believed that Israel's actions were indeed disproportionate, and those who asserted Israel's right to self-defense. What was never pointed out, to my knowledge, was the implicit assumption that Israel's actions was the fact that the implicit assumption that Israel's actions were defensive in nature, since it only makes sense to talk about Israel engaging in a quote-unquote disproportionate response if it is already assumed that Israel was responding to Hamas attacks. The possibility, which I believe is fully borne out by the timeline of events that I've just read out to you, that Israel was engaging in an offensive attack on Hamas and the unity government and the people of Gaza in order to destroy the unity government that Hamas had formed with Fatah, for the reasons given. That possibility was implicitly excluded from the realm of possibility. We were not invited to ask the fundamental question: why is the Israeli government doing this?